In today's video, we have a lot to cover, including some offseason trade talk focused on some younger players. Today, we're going to be talking about players like Trevor Zegras, Kent Johnson, Marty Necas, Patrick Laine. Will we see some of these top young players on the move this offseason? Plus, we have some further updates on the Canadian rights package of the NHL in Canada. It sounds like Rogers may be selling off more than just Monday night action to Amazon. We'll discuss some other options that are apparently being talked about as well. We also have a new CEO of MLSE, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the company that owns the Maple Leafs. So we're going to discuss how that impacts things in the Leafs organization. Several updates around the NHL regarding injuries, roster updates as well, and the final three finalists have been named for the Hobey Baker Trophy as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today. Let's start with several roster updates, lots of player movement between the NHL, AHL, some injuries, and we also have some signings here in a few minutes as well to discuss. We have the Pittsburgh Penguins today have recalled Sam Poulin, so he'll be back in the NHL lineup. The Ottawa Senators finally updated the injury situation for youngster Angus Crookshank. They're listing him as out indefinitely. They did not say exactly what the injury was. I believe it's a lower body injury, but we don't really have a full detail. Rourke Chartier has also been sent to the American Hockey League. I assume that's because he's been injured for a while and hasn't really played. So that would be to get him some playing time, and he would be eligible to play. I believe he'll be eligible to play in the American Hockey League playoffs, assuming that's what they want him to do. And they've recalled Yuri Schmenkel, so he'll get into the lineup as the Senators host the Florida Panthers tonight. And apparently Travis Hamonic hasn't been a healthy scratch. He's also dealing with an injury as well in the back end. So lots of stuff going on there in Ottawa. Washington, they apparently ruled out that TJ Oshie will be able to play for the next couple of games. He's been in and out of the lineup quite a bit lately. Of course, the Capitals are in a major playoff push. Big battle with Pittsburgh tonight. It'll be the 69th time in their history that Ovechkin and Crosby go head-to-head. And for a big 2 points tonight, as both teams are still pushing for a potential playoff spot. In Florida, Aaron Ekblad is going to be out for an extended time, likely for the rest of the regular season. Head coach Paul Maurice seemed fairly hopeful and optimistic that he would be ready to go for game one of the playoffs, but I guess we'll see. Ekblad has certainly had more than enough of his fair share of injuries over the years, and there's been a few times for playoffs that he's been unavailable. So we'll see how things go, and if Ekblad's ready to go for game one. Of course, we don't know who yet their opponent is going to be, but no matter who it is, he'll be an important piece there on the back end. Vegas has recalled forward youngster Brendan Brisson, so he's back to the NHL level. Vancouver, some updates. They've sent Arshdeep Bains down to the American Hockey League. One update from Elliot Friedman regarding Elias Lindholm. It's not confirmed. He just said that he had heard a rumor that Lindholm may be out the rest of the regular season, but he said he's had some other sources say to be careful with that and to not confirm it. So he's not really sure what to think, but there's certainly, some optimism and some skepticism out there depending on who you talk to regarding Lindholm's health. So at this point, if he can play in the playoffs, I mean, that would be the bigger concern. I think Vancouver's in pretty decent spot standings wise. We know they're already clinched, so they're in for sure. They're more than likely going to finish in first place. I mean, it is possible they slip a second, but I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be more concerned about him being available for the playoffs, so I'd be letting him take all the time he needs if it helps him be available for the first round. And in Philadelphia, they've also confirmed that Captain Sean Couturier is dealing with an upper body injury. I believe it was a shoulder. He's going to be out for a little bit. They're listing him as day-to-day, and they're going on a 2-game road trip, and he's going to miss that. So he's out for at least 2 games for sure. After that, we'll have to see, and he'll be reevaluated. Some signings today. We have a couple signings in the NHL with some college players getting their prospect contracts here. The New Jersey Devils today confirmed that they've signed college UFA forward Dylan Wendt from the University of Western Michigan. He had 44 points in 38 games this past season in college hockey, so certainly a good signing there, at least based on his current production. A bit of a late bloomer, of course. 23 years old. Certainly has, by the looks of things, some decent possibility of turning out, but it's hard to say. A lot of these college players get a small taste of the NHL. Not a lot of them do stick to be long-term, like full-time players. So we'll see, but Dylan Wendt goes to New Jersey. The Arizona Coyotes today signed one of their prospects who is a college player, but he was a drafted player. 2021 7th-round pick, forward Sam Limkin gets his 3-year entry-level contract. That contract will kick in next season. I believe he's going to play for their AHL team in Tucson on an amateur tryout for right now, but that contract's not effective until next year. Of course, he's played the past few years with Quinnipiac lately, so we'll see. Limkin appears to have made pretty good progress and development there, so be curious to see how things go for him in the pros. In San Jose, seems to have won the sweepstakes for one of the top college UFAs. That would be a teammate of Limkin from Quinnipiac as well, Colin Graf. Graf was probably one of the top 5 UFAs out there. Some people had him ranked higher than others, depending on who you talk to, but certainly a guy who has pretty decent upside. So he will get an opportunity to go to San Jose and get to play immediately. We know he was down to about 5 or 6 teams, met with a lot of them, and they were starting to tell people yesterday who was in, who was out, and it comes down to the Sharks, and to be honest, it's a good spot for him. He can probably get opportunities in their top 6 immediately. A lot of teams that he'd be looking at, he probably would have had to play in the American Hockey League. Probably would have had to. They probably wanted his contract to start next year, and possibly to have like an amateur tryout, or even if it was going to kick in this year, you know, he probably wouldn't have had a regular role. A lot of the other teams that were in the mix were, I think, it's a little deeper, right? The Sharks have had, if you take a look at their roster, like, I really think they could plug him in there in the top 6 or top 9 for sure. So it's a good opportunity for him. He gets to burn a year off his contract. He gets NHL games immediately. Obviously, San Jose is not going to the playoffs. They've only got 8 games left. And because of that, too, that means when his contract is up, that he is not going to have enough games to be a full restricted free agent, won't be eligible for an offer sheet because he's not going to have enough games played, since he's only going to be able to get a maximum of 8 games in this year. But Graf goes to San Jose. I think that's a good risk for them to take. Like I said, he's one of the better college UFA players out there, and they have nothing but opportunities to give them to see where things go. Speaking of college players, the Hobey Baker finalists has been announced today, down to the 3 finalists. Of course, we had seen last week they announced, I believe it was the final 10 that were in consideration. The top 3 finalists are Cutter Gauthier, Macklin Celebrini, and Jackson Blake. Of course, all highly ranked NHL prospects. Celebrini will be the first overall selection at the 24 NHL draft, so certainly lots to like there. The one player that comes to mind that might probably be, you know, getting looked over the most, that deserves to be in that conversation, would be Will Smith, the Sharks prospect, who was also a high pick in last year's draft. He had a phenomenal season as well, and I really thought he would be in the top 3. I'm not surprised about Gauthier or Celebrini. I'm just a little surprised Blake was over Smith, but Blake is a really good player too. But I just thought Smith had just a little bit of an edge there. But yeah, we'll see who the winner is here in due time. As we mentioned as well yesterday, one of the bigger stories that I was talking about, and a few other people were reporting on as well, was the fact that we got word that Rogers, who owns the national TV rights of the NHL in Canada, was considering selling off part of their package as early as next year. I'm not even sure if they were looking at doing some things for this year's playoffs. I don't think there's enough time really for that right now. It's more because there's 2 years left. It's a 12-year deal, over a $5 billion total value. Things have not really worked out for Rogers. It hasn't been a great profitable venture for them. They obviously have a lot of ties to the game of hockey. Of course, Rogers, along with Bell, own the Toronto Maple Leafs and MLSE, and they own, I believe it's 75% combined right now, and they each have a 50-50 split of that, and that's going to change. We're going to talk about that here in a moment as well, because there's some MLSE news we want to discuss. But ultimately, like, Rogers has been restructuring and kind of going through some changes here when it comes to their TV stuff, and like, there's 2 years left. Word is they want to kind of move part of what they have. So there was some talks with Amazon about their Monday night games maybe going to Amazon Prime. Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com today is also reporting that there's other talks going on with TSN to possibly get back to the national game as well, and maybe take on part of that package. So we'll see. I fully suspect there's going to be changes with their rights package for next year, with other parties being involved to some capacity. And like I said before, it's fully expected that Rogers is not going to bid to be the national rights holder, at least not the majority rights holder at the very least, when that contract is up. Will they maybe try to, if the NHL goes a similar path like they did in the U.S. with ESPN and TNT, and they split it up, then maybe they have a piece of it, but definitely don't want to hold that much. It has not been a good venture for them, to say the least. Now, as I mentioned as well, we also have some big news regarding the Leafs organization, but much more than the Leafs. Of course, MLSE, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, they are the owner of a lot of teams, including the Toronto Raptors, Toronto Maple Leafs, and several other ventures that they've gotten themselves into here. But they have hired a new CEO, and that's Keith Pelly. Keith Pelly is well known to MLSE, has had a lot of different roles within the Canadian media landscape, including being a former president of TSN. At one point, he was the CEO of Rogers Media. I know I heard like Jeff Merrick talking on his radio program today that Pelly was the one who hired him to bring him to Sportsnet. Obviously, being the CEO of Rogers Media, would have looked after a lot of that stuff in their, their personalities and analysts and things that they have on the air. At one point, he was also the president of the Toronto Argonauts Football Club, which is also under MLSE. Most recently, he was the chief executive of golf's DP World Tour, based out of London, I believe it was. So, obviously, Pelly comes in. Now, it's believed that in 2 years' time, in 2026, and the way the ownership structure is there, like I said, Rogers and Bell each kind of have they have a 75% combined ownership, and they split that evenly. Larry Tannenbaum owns the other 25%, or at least he did. He ended up selling 5% off to a minority stake, and then still owns 20% of that. But essentially, they have 75%. And then the rest is there. And apparently they have the right to buy out Larry Tannenbaum in 2026, and it's fully expected that's what they're going to do. So there'll be, and I'm not sure about how that 5% stake he sold off, if that has to be included, or I'm not sure how that part's going to work, if they'll own 95%, or if that other owner that bought the 5% will have to sell too. I don't know. But either way, lots of big changes coming up. And of course, if Tannenbaum, who's dealt directly with guys like Brendan Shanahan running the Leafs and Masai Ujiri running the Toronto Raptors, if he's not going to be involved anymore, it's going to brings a lot of questions of how's that going to affect the relationship between the head honchos running those teams to, of course, their bosses at MLSE and the board and the CEO. So clearly, like we know in the Leafs, they've had a lot of great regular season success. They've had a lot of playoff appearances, moderate playoff success, going back to only winning one round last year. We'll see how things go this year, but it does make you wonder with a new voice, and listening to Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick, who, like I said, have worked under Pelly before through Sportsnet, that he definitely wouldn't be the type to go in there and just kind of sit back and let everything be, as it is. Like, he's going to have a plan and he's going to have a vision, and they're curious to see what he wants to do. Obviously, I believe Shanahan's contract, I think, is good for a couple more years as well. It might be tied to the same time frame as Tannenbaum's potential exit there. So I wonder how much change we could possibly end up seeing on the top end of the Maple Leafs organization. So clearly, Shanahan's had a long run there. They've had limited success. I do wonder if they don't get further success over the next year or so, while this the time of Tannenbaum's ownership, it's kind of running down, if we could see major upheaval there within that organization. But it's definitely a big move within the organization, and we'll be curious to see how it affects those relationships. Now, as I mentioned, as far as some player movement in the offseason, I want to focus on some young players. I mean, we've talked about some of these players in recent days, but there's been a lot more reports, a lot of other names kind of getting up, in the media here as well. Like I said, we've talked recently about Marty Necas and the Carolina Hurricanes, maybe Montreal being a team there that could target Necas. He's a top young player, who's going to be an RFA for the last time, and Carolina's got a lot of interesting cap moves to make. They're a team that's faced with some difficult decisions. They've got a lot of contracts expiring, including a couple of top four defensemen with Brady Shea and Brett Pesce. Odds are they're not going to be able to keep both of them. You've got Necas, you've got Seth Jarvis, who's in line for a major long-term deal with a big raise as well. And there's others. They're not the only ones. Yes, the cap is going up, but you can only give so many players so much money. Jake Gensel's been an acquisition at the deadline. And of course, like I said before, I think they traded for him with the expectation of trying to extend him and keep him. They gave up a fair bit. They'd like to get that done. So obviously, like I said, they're going to have player movement there. Natchez is a name that's been brought up. I've seen it in Montreal Hockey Now. They've since published an article as well talking about some young players that the Habs could possibly target. Name was brought up there again. So again, getting more play. More media people are certainly taking notice here. Some of the names we've already kind of discussed. Patrick Laine, of course, was brought up, and Kent Johnson in Columbus. We know they're going to have a new general manager. So clearly, this new general manager, whoever that might be, is not going to have ties to these players. They're going to come in and probably want to kind of, change things up a bit. This team has not been successful, and they're not going to necessarily panic and move out all their young players. But if you take a look at some of their top talent here and what they have, and especially how they've been used and how they've been deployed, and just a lot of weird decisions in Columbus. And I can see players like Johnson and Laine just ready for a fresh start. Now, Laine is not going to be that simple. Johnson's not making a lot of money yet, so it's easy. If they want to trade him, it wouldn't be that challenging to find a team where he could be a good fit and maybe get a return that makes sense for both sides. But in the case of Laine, he's got, over $8 million for a couple more years. We already know he's not going to be back the rest of this year. He's had his issues on and off the ice, both staying healthy, going through the player assistance program. Getting him a new fresh start, as much as I think would be really beneficial and something he might even, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, of course, but I would think he might be very interested in it. Will be challenging to do given his contract and given the fact that he hasn't played a lot this year, and we haven't seen his old self, like we saw in Winnipeg, putting up all those goals. Going to be very, very difficult to get him that fresh start. But I do think in the right scenario, that's something that, he and the team very well would be interested in. Trevor Zegras, like I said, another name to watch. I've seen more articles talking about Zegras likely being available. Again, we've talked about Montreal, but I don't think the Habs seem to get a lot of the attention when it comes to going after top young players, because that's been the MO of Ken Hughes, the GM, and he's done it for 2 years in a row. And a lot of people suspect he's going to try to do it a third year in a row at the NHL draft. And one of these guys would very well make sense for them to target, and it could happen. I'm not saying it won't, but they're not the only team out there in that kind of predicament. Like I said, Zegras is a player that's not necessarily going to move, but if the right offer, especially in a hockey trade, comes along for the Ducks to get a different kind of player, I really do think Pat Verbeek would certainly entertain that kind of move for sure. There's all kinds of different talent around the league where some swaps do make sense. But given the situation in Columbus with the new GM coming in and Marty Natchez and the situation in Carolina, I think a couple of those players are highly, highly likely to move via trade. Zegras is a little bit more questionable, but again, we've seen enough reports that the Ducks have had enough conversations. Do you think at some point something is going to come together? But like I said, Montreal gets all the play in the media because Montreal media has been focusing hardcore on it. There's been articles pretty much on the daily about what young player they're going to target next. And again, that's kind of where some of this came from Montreal Hockey Now. But I don't think they're the only team that's really it's amazing to me that other fan bases are not seeing more and more talk around their teams, because these are all players that would be interested and intrigued by all the other 31 teams, or 30 teams in this case, I guess, given the team that they're with as well, wouldn't be obviously looking to make the move themselves. So at the end of the day, it's going to be a busy summer, lots of movement, some interesting young talent definitely up for grabs. Be curious to see where they all end up, but I would not be surprised to see at least a few, or possibly even all of these guys on the move. Give me your mock trades for these players down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.